Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. We are joined today, Eugene Meininger.
Howdy.
It's good to have you back, right? You 2 episodes, Eugene, right? And you forgot to cue to hey. We were just talking about how well we knew the shtick, and
Yeah, I know.
So
the past 2 weeks have been those weeks. Good.
Eugene's been in contract discussions for a little while. His agent has said that he should walk out a couple of episodes, see what these bums end up with.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm gonna say is other podcasts have advertisements, and I hear the co-hosts get a cut of that. And all I've gotten is like a SQL Data Partners T-shirt. And
a very fine T-shirt. I might add.
I'm thinking about going free agent. Yeah.
Well, if you can figure out how to get advertisers on the podcast that you're on, right, then my hat's off to you.
You just do Audible. You just do and then get your sequel to Hero book on Audible, and then just.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a currency shortage, Eugene. Haven't you heard, right? So I can't cut those pennies in half, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, that's true.
Look, hey pennies are real. Hey pennies are a thing.
Oh, okay. And of course, Kevin Fiesel, not to be forgotten.
Hello.
So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in. And so today, our topic is data modeling for Power BI.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that. I should say we didn't mention it, or it's been a little while since we mentioned it, but said shirt, should you, compañero, want to get a shirt and help support us so that I can, send Eugene a half of a penny, right? You can take a peek at SQLDataPartners.com/t-shirt. That will send you, I think at one time we did, anyway, I think we cut it out. I can't remember. Anyway, it's now an Etsy site. Etsy is where you can get those shirts. And we'll
artisanally grown.
That's right. So they are made right here in Mechanicsville, Virginia. So, okay. So there's that. And our show notes for today's episode, SQLDataPartners.com/Power BI. If you want to check out the show notes, or /205 for our episode. Okay, so Power BI data modeling, and one of the things that I found on the interwebs, right?
Okay.
And we've talked about this before, right? But the concept, so Power BI was trying to focus on the self-service need, right? You wanted to give power to the people, and let them do their own stuff. So there are some. What's that?
I said that never goes well.
That never goes well, which is why we had to talk about.
Just query my databases.
Yeah, and so there's this concept of, okay, they have data, they want to load it in, right? They're going to try to define some metrics, and then they're going to produce reports. Mm-hmm. And so I think as I saw this, and perhaps it can be in defined metrics, but when I think about modeling, it almost feels like we're either missing a step from that flow, or perhaps it is under defined metrics, and that ultimately is the idea of this data modeling, this data modeling idea. And I think a lot of times this is where we see people get themselves into trouble, right? Where they're like, hey, let me just start loading stuff up, creating reports, and then it's like, oof, problem.
Well, and the engine will help you get in trouble, because it tries to guess about relationships based on names. I believe it's smart enough to read foreign key relationships if you have those, but a lot of times you don't.
Sure.
And I don't know if it was something you and I were working on or not, but there was some situation where I brought in like 10 tables, and they all had a primary key called ID. So it's like, you get a relationship, you get an inactive relationship, because that would create a loop otherwise. And then it's like, and you can turn the setting off at the file level. It's not a global setting, like the whole auto date time calendar table thing. So if you want to avoid that, you have to create the file, and then before you load in any data, turn off the auto relationships. Otherwise, if you've got a database where every primary key is called ID, it's going to be a party up in there.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Which is also tough because there are times when you wanted to try and figure that out. I mean, again, the whole
Yeah,
idea
no,
of like trying to go faster, right?
when it works, it's great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Just like most features, right? When it works, it's great.
Moral of the story: don't use ID as the name of your surrogate key.
Right.
Yeah. You might need a few more characters in there, right? You can at least go to the
it'll
8, right?
even outside of Power BI, it'll help if you don't have foreign key constraints. You should have foreign key constraints, but it'll help otherwise.
There you go. So, admittedly, I was, I don't think too poorly of me, Eugene, but I did happen to.
I already do.
Oh, man.
I'm kidding.
Contract negotiations have just taken
Yeah,
a turn,
right.
turn
You're
for the
going to need
worse.
some ice for that sick burn. No, go ahead.
And so I was taking a peek at the guy in the cube, right?
Oh, no. I mean, he's great. He's great in
some-
person. He's great on YouTube.
That's right.
He's just splendid. So
Yeah.
I take no offense.
I agree. I am jealous. I envy what those guys have been able to do with their videos. They make it look super easy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is hard work.
Yeah.
I digress. But one of the things that they brought up, so in terms of helping yourself out, so again, data modeling, right? So this idea of I'm not sure what the percentages are. Obviously, I think your environment is going to vary, whether you have SQL Server data you could pull in. Again, because we're talking about the self-service concept, Excel, right, is where a lot of this data lives. And so Patrick made the comment, he said, particularly if you're coming from Excel, is that you ultimately want to try and model some of that data, stay away from wide tables, because then when you start doing some of those joins and whatnot, you could run into performance issues, right? As your data grows, right? You just that width will cause problems. And while a bit of a challenge, he ultimately suggested, and I'm kind of reading the tea leaves here a little bit, but he suggested that try to ultimately organize your data into a star schema.
Yes, that is definitely a recommendation.
The star schema is optimized for reporting, right? For helping you with grouping, with sorting, right? All of those aggregate pieces, and star schemas are ultimately lend themselves much more to that.
Sure. So when you're data modeling for Power BI, really you're optimizing for two things, and there's some overlap, but it's important to understand that they're different. You're optimizing for performance and you're optimizing for people. And the latter is really important given the target demographic. And so there's a lot of these recommendations, especially the star schema one, where it will give you better performance, but it will also just give you a better user experience as a developer, as a data modeler, even if you're kind of an unofficial one. So which would you prefer to start with, Carlos? Do we want to talk about performance or we want to talk about people? What are you feeling?
I want to talk people because that goes back to the whole Kimball model. Like the reason for the star schema wasn't performance. It was so that your business analysts can understand the problem better.
Right. So whenever I give a talk about DAX, I say like 3 times in the presentation, like I have the slide 3 times, that DAX is good at 2 specific things. It's good at aggregations and it's good at filtering. Like from a performance perspective, from a design perspective, like that's the scalpel. That's what it was built for. And so when you're creating tables, your tables should exist to do one of those 2 things, and preferably just one of those 2 things. And so star schema aligns with that extremely well, because your transaction tables, your business event tables are for aggregation, and then your reference tables, dimension, lookup, whatever you want to call it, are for filtering. And so automatically you've made your life a lot easier as a modeler and for your users, because it becomes abundantly clear based on the naming alone what you're doing with each table, right? Customers is for filtering by customer, but invoices is for aggregation, right? So that's one of the starting pieces, is making it really, really clear. Where do my measures go? Well, generally, you might make a separate table for measures, but a lot of times they're going to go on that transaction table. They're going to go where you're doing the aggregation. And a lot of times, if you have your data model cleaned out, you're always going to be looking on your dimension tables to pull in filters for your report, right? You're not pulling them from the transaction table, even though you could a lot of times, unless it's something very specific to the transaction. So that's
So
one of the first things. Good.
just to, I mean, maybe to back up for a minute, we've already, so
Yeah.
we said star schema, right? And we jumped
We never
into
defined
dimensions
it.
and measures, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, and I think that is where, so, we have a wide range of people who are listening, right? But
Sure.
ultimately, if somebody is, hey, I'm interested in data modeling and Power BI, right? They wanted to pick it up.
Right.
Maybe the question is, or the thought is, okay, so you have in the star schema, you have some terms, right, that you need. Maybe first we can define some of those terms,
Yeah,
but also
so-
even then, does it, I hate to say doesn't matter.
Yes. So pause your recording right now, everybody. Just hit pause on whatever player you've got. Grab a copy of the Data Warehouse Toolkit from Ralph Kimball.
Ooh.
Plenty of copies there. And in about 4 weeks, when you're done with the book, unpause, and then boom, we're where we need to be.
Yeah, you're gonna need to bring a drink because it's a very dry read. I've yet to read it. I should, but from what I've heard, is extremely dry. What I recommend.
One of the companies, you'll forgive me. One of the companies I worked for. Now I was actually doing like internal network. Right, this was my very first job out of college. They were a consulting group. It was mandatory reading. And at one point, they actually gave everybody a test at a company meeting. I was
Good.
like, you have got to be joking me, right? And now, of course, now I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention, right? Or but.
So a related book that I recommend that's an easier read, and I recommend it because I've only read like 2 or 3 chapters, but I got something really useful out of that.
There you go.
Is Agile Data Warehouse Design, and the part that I got greatest use out of from that's relevant to the conversation today is the terminology for this whole like dimensions and facts, because that's not the best. The terminology I got for a fact table or transaction table are business events. We sold something, we made something, we moved something, something happened in the business, right? And so you have tables that are business events, and then you have reference tables or lookup tables. And those are where you look up information related to those events. And so when we talk about star schema, all that generally means is that you've got a central business event table of here's stuff that happened, circled like points of a star of all these reference or lookup tables of here's more information about that event.
Like here's the detail of what I sold.
Right. So like
who are the people were involved with that?
Yeah,
sale,
exactly. Because if you have a table of sales, I sold a laptop, or I may have a customer associated with that. And if they buy laptops every week because they're a school or a business or whatever, I may not want to have their address repeated 1,000 times, right? And so that's why you make these lookup tables. So yeah, hopefully that helps define some of the things, because you're right, we do have kind of a diverse audience.
Yeah, throwing a screwball in here. The way that I like to phrase it is verbs versus nouns.
Right.
The verb is the thing that happened. So
right.
The purchase. But if you want to know who purchased the thing, what did they purchase, those types of questions, the nouns, are what you describe in those dimensions. So you ask the question of how much was the purchase for, that lives in the fact table. You say, for whom was the purchase, that lives in the dimension.
Right.
And so we did talk about foreign keys, and maybe that's not necessarily the best way to get started, but if you're familiar with that concept, at least that's one way to think about this relationship,
right,
kind of as well.
So going back to the people thing. So I already said, hey, a lot of what you're doing is filtering and aggregating information. And so the whole, verbs versus noun works well because you filter on nouns and you aggregate on verbs, right? Because I want to know the total number of purchases of those things.
Sure.
I want to know the average of the sales. But the other thing where it helps with people is that generally speaking, the relationships and the filtering is what I might like think of as like a one-way street, right? You've got what we describe as a one-to-many relationship because one customer can buy many laptops or something. But the important part is the filtering is kind of like water. It flows downhill. And so it's really helpful to understand that, okay, if I filter on customer, the filter that I've put on that table is going to flow downhill to my fact table, my verb table, my business event table, whatever. And one of the reasons that from a user experience perspective, star schema is so great is you can't screw that up, right? You don't get into any weird edge cases because it's always just this one-way street. It's always just this downhill kind of river flowing to the delta that is your fact table. And when you deviate from that, then you can really mess things up. So I'll give you an example. So you can do something called bi-directional filtering. It's uncommon, it's rare, and if you do it, unless you have an extremely good reason, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Unless you are either trying to implement row-level security and you have a security table that you're doing that for, or you know exactly what you're doing, bi-directional filtering is going to shoot you in the foot every time. And there was one time I had it on by accident.
Yeah. Says the guy with the hole in his foot.
Yes, yes, on a customer project, because I had accidentally set up bi-directional filtering to my date table from my fact table, right? And I was trying to do like a cumulative like sales year to date. So in theory, the sales should, as Kevin might say, monotonically increase, right? Should never go down, right?
Sure.
If you're doing cumulative.
Except for return.
Yeah. Well, so what was happening is on the weekends, the sales would plummet to zero. So I had this like stegadon back kind of thing going on, and I was losing my, what? I couldn't figure it out.
So for the kids in the audience, that's strongly monotonic.
Yeah, sorry. My apologies. Yeah, it was going down to zero, and I was like, this should literally not happen. Well, the problem was that they only sent invoices on weekdays. And so what was happening is the sales was bi-directionally filtering. The water was going uphill, like in the book Holes or whatever, where, the water was going uphill and it was going back to the date and filtering out the dates. So as far as my measure was concerned, weekends did not exist because they never sold anything on the weekend. And so again, you get this like stegadon back, spiky back kind of thing. And so when you do a star schema and you do just one-to-many single directional filters, it's much, much harder to mess something up.
So we've talked about, modifying that data, right? Creating a star schema.
Yeah.
Am I ultimately going to be using Power Query to take so I have extremely wide Excel file and I need to create tables? Is that what is that the suggestion? Or do you need to break that up in Excel? Or what's your thoughts in terms of, I have a single Excel file with 100 columns, right? What do I do?
So to like put some place setting, right? You're Chris in accounting and Carlos in IT is no help whatsoever. And so you don't have database access, you don't have an ERD to diagram the data, so you don't have anything. All you have is your ERP system. Your Dynamics Great Plains allows you to make a smart list, and you can get all of the data out in one giant flat Excel table. And you do it once a week, and you're trying to make this management dashboard, right? So what do you do? Well, first off, when it comes to where do I like clean up the data, where do I slice and dice it, the the way that I describe Power Query, the main language is called M, and I like to joke that it stands for minimum wage, because anything you could pay someone minimum wage to do in Excel, you can automate in Power Query. So you're going to do it in Power Query. There's literally no good reason ever to do the data manipulation in Excel, because you can overwrite a cell. You can mess it up. And
Right.
VLOOKUPs are powerful, but they're a pain, right?
Sure, that's right.
Because I mean,
the upkeep, and you have to do it every time.
well, at my
right?
last job,
files.
the president of the company, like a decade ago, had written this technician schedule board in Excel, and every once in a while, one of the customer service people would accidentally overwrite a cell and break it.
Sure.
And so I had to go in and like figure out what was wrong. So you're going to be doing your slicing and dicing in Power Query, right? But as to, okay, I have 100 columns. There's a couple different approaches for how you cut it up, and you have to be thinking about what your goals are, right? So the first one is what we already talked about. Try to make it a star schema. So what parts are unique to the transaction and ideally never repeat, or are numerical values that I'm going to be aggregating on, right? So for a sale, the sale date is unique to that transaction. The sale amount is a numerical value that I'm going to aggregate, but the product is not. It's a noun, like Kevin said. And so that I'm probably going to split up into its own thing. So there's just the basic, bread and butter. As for when Patrick LeBlanc said, hey, don't have wide tables, that's a performance issue. That's not necessarily a people issue. So the whole reason that you want to avoid wide tables is it hurts compression, which hurts performance, is the short of it. Because basically a lot of the compression that goes on with the DAX engine is kind of like doing a multi-sort in Excel. The engine has to figure out, all right, I'm going to sort by this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And those first few sort really well, and so it can compress them, right?
Sure.
So if you sell the same product ID 10,000 times, if it can sort by that first, it does something called run length encoding, which instead of writing product ID 147, 147, 147, 147 10,000 times, it does the equivalent of saying 147, 10,000. And so that works amazing for the first like 4 or 5 columns. But by the time you're on number 26, you can sort by that, but it's so far at the end of that Excel multi-sort that it's basically fragmented. You get no value. Sure. So the reason you avoid wide tables is primarily a performance thing, and then partially a people thing, in that it's hard to navigate. You want to get rid of the stuff you don't need.
Yeah, you want to look at all that. Yeah, exactly. You have multiple.
So the first reason you split it up is we totally do a star schema and just do what we say because we know better, right? Kidding. That sounds arrogant. The second reason is because fewer columns means better compression, which means better performance, right? And then the third reason is you have to give some thought to the granularity or level of detail that you're dealing with. And so a lot of that first one will take care of that. But there are situations where maybe the data is coming in at a certain level of detail and you want something different. So a good example is common in sales systems is you have the header and then you have the line items, right? So the header is kind of like the receipt that you get when you go to Burger King and you buy a bunch of stuff. And then the line items are like, I bought a burger and a shake and I have a bowl of regret, like all this kind of stuff. And so depending on what you're trying to do, you may want that as one flat table with some repeated data for the header, or you may want it split it out. And so, that's also something to consider, is maybe you're splitting that out just because it's going to help with certain calculations. So those are the 3 reasons in my mind where you're going to be cutting up the tables into different shapes. And you're definitely going to do that in Power Query. Do not do that in DAX. It's not meant for that. You can, but don't. And don't do that in Excel because you can mess it up. You can overwrite it.
You've been warned.
Yeah.
But we're happy to fix up their problem.
I mean, for $150 an hour, $200 an hour, like I'll clean your shoes. So just let me know. Yeah. Anything legal and spouse approved, we're good to go.
Yeah. So now, Kevin, I'm curious, right? So we kind of started with this idea of, again, self-service. I'm ended up with an Excel, right? You tend to be on the other side, right? I think you work with a lot of structured data, or data that maybe it gets structured along the way. I'm sure you do both, right? But in terms of what where I'm going is, I already have a data warehouse. Let's say I already have a star schema, right? Attached to data warehouse.
Yep.
Are you seeing a need still to do data manipulation before you start using Power BI, or any data modeling, or is it pretty much just like, oh, let me just attach my cube and off I go?
Short answer is yes. The long answer is I'm still thinking about, that's roughly $5 for a shoe shine from Eugene. I think I can do that.
I mean, if I can do it quickly enough, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, it's like 2 minutes. It's not that long to shine a pair of shoes. So.
there is a travel fee if you want me to fly or drive out to Durham. Just to let you know, there's a trip charge. Like I've been in consulting long enough that I know that trick.
T&E is included.
Yeah.
$5 to shine the shoe. It's $500 to get me there.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to come up to Pittsburgh, we'll talk.
All right. So as far as preparatory work, short answer is yes, because if all of your data is already in that warehouse, if everything, again, we're talking Kimball style warehouse where you got your stuff right.
Sure.
You have the one ETL process. You have everything cleaned up in that data set, everything ready to go, explaining things, and maybe even broken out into data marts that are applicable to business domains. Sure. Then at that point, I would say no. Pretty much Power BI is load that data in and get going.
Yeah.
But in practice, you're usually going to say, well, I want that data, but I also want to incorporate this other data set over here. I want to get these other databases. I want to pull a set of records from an API someplace. And at that point, you're back to square one of, yes, now I have to form these relationships. Now I have to tie these things together. I may have to change the grain of some of my queries so that these items match up. So in most cases, even if you have a good data warehouse, you're still going to be doing this sort of data modeling in Power BI.
Yeah. I think, Carlos, you and I ran into the opposite problem with a customer where we had somebody who was managing a data warehouse and was, you'll recall, laying out track as we went along. But part of the issue is that he saw it as a golden hammer, right? Like he was like, oh, well, let me just make a column for that. And so the problem we had was too many columns because there was just so many of these one-off things where it's like, why are you putting the logic in the ETL just because you're more comfortable there? Like,
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So I think
so you're almost arguing that in that case, it's like, let me just go tie that in from whatever system that came from. It doesn't necessarily need to stay in the warehouse.
Not exactly. I'm saying, so there's this is a weird analogy, but I do weird analogies. So I remember reading an article once by, I think, James Ernest about how you make board games, and he referenced the idea of like how you make a statue, and there's two ways to do it, and it's probably quoted by like Da Vinci or some famous person, and then Kevin will correct me, but you can either build it up out of clay, out of nothing, or you can chip it away from marble. And what I'm saying is, when you're dealing with a pre-existing data warehouse, there's a good chance that you're going to have to chip away at marble. And whenever you're starting self-service, you're building out of clay. And so a lot of times you're going to be taking away stuff that's extraneous, unless, like Kevin says, not only do you have the one data warehouse to rule them all, you have all these data marts that have been perfectly honed for the content area you're dealing with, which just I haven't seen yet. I don't know if you have. Yeah. Kimball is the platonic ideal kind of thing, right? Like I remember in philosophy class, we talked about platonic ideals, and like Plato had an idea of like, that is the ideal chair. And then every other chair is an instance that is in some way flawed, right? That's data warehouses. There's a platonic floating Kimball data warehouse somewhere in the ether, and every existing one is a uniquely flawed implementation of that data warehouse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
So welcome to the allegory of the cave with Eugene.
Yeah, right. I'm surprised like Kevin hasn't like hip checked me yet as I botch my college philosophy rememberings, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's that.
But I think that is fair. That's
right.
actually a perfectly fair statement that the Kimball model is an ideal, that there is the idea of the Kimball data warehouse, and every implementation is going to be missing things. It will have compromises necessary because we are imperfect people,
Right.
yada, yada, yada. And for the most part, you're not going to have everything you need in that warehouse. The warehouse is designed to answer specific known business questions. And if you want to ask a question self-service that was not a specific known business question,
Right.
well, you got to get it somewhere else. You got to do it some other way. And that often involves bringing in an additional data source.
I will say that with Power BI, chipping away at marble is a lot easier than working with clay, because you can get started and then chip away the marble after you know what you want to build, right? Unlike real marble, you know, you can bring in everything. You can bring in all the columns. Like I've done this before, like just like the thing we're doing with the printing stuff, just suck in everything and then later be like, okay, I only actually needed these 8. That is a lot easier than you have this clay and you have to decide, well, what shape do I want? Is this going to be 1 table or 2? You know, so if I had to pick between the two, I'd rather have a data warehouse and chip away at the marble than a bunch of flat files and build it out of clay, or you know, a bunch of random SQL tables and build it out of clay.
Yeah, but you may not be so lucky, right? It just depends on.
That's why I get paid. Yeah,
yeah.
No, I get paid to be unlucky.
Yeah, help people go faster there.
Yep.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I think those are some of the high points. One other thing, we've got time.
After that 20-minute rant about neo-Aristotelianism.
Oh man, that's not exactly what I was thinking.
I will say though, in philosophy class, I learned about sophistry, and at the time, I'm like, this is so dumb. Who in the world is going to argue that truth is based on what's most persuasive? And then, like a decade later, I learned about politics. I'm like, oh, now I get it.
Yes.
Anyway.
Public perception.
Yeah.
Finicky thing.
Perception is reality.
Yeah, I knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited that Bill and Ted may be coming back.
Go ahead, Carlos. Go ahead.
Okay, so we mentioned it, I think, in the beginning, kind of in passing, but what's your take on turning off auto date time?
It's usually a good thing. I mean, so I know my
it's
peers,
usually a good thing to the
turn it
future,
off.
or it's to turn it off. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's a good thing. I know my peers are excited about it. I don't know enough to articulate it well, but basically auto date time makes a certain number of assumptions on your behalf. And
Right.
honestly, when you get to a certain point with Power BI and a maturity with using it, you're always going to be creating your own date table. It's just always like one of the first things you're going to do, especially because a lot of times you may have business specific logic, like that one customer that I mentioned.
The weird calendar, right?
Right, like the customer I mentioned where I did the bi-directional filtering by accident, their calendar table was based on invoicing days, you know, so they could do an apples to apples comparison. And so, yeah, I think it's fine to start. There's reasons that it's bad that I don't know exactly, but I'm confident that once you reach a certain maturity, you're just almost always going to be making your own date table. And then at that point, it's best to just use that.
Sure. Awesome. Final thoughts, Kevin?
Yes, I don't have a take on auto date time.
Okay. There you go. You heard it here first, compañeros.
If he doesn't know, it's not important. That's how it is.
Okay, so before we close out today, we do have a couple of shout outs, which they've disappeared. How did they disappear?
All right. So are they shout ins now?
Are
Like, how does that?
that? They
They're
are.
done
Did
shouting.
I somehow delete them?
It's like when you get one of those bad MailChimp things. It's like, thank you to first name, last name for saying,
that's right.
tweet a thought. It's like, well,
I prefer. It's more like PBS. Thanks to viewers like you.
right.
Yes, that's right.
I guess we
Thanks
do
to
have viewers
like
now,
you.
right? These are still going up on YouTube or wherever you're putting them. I
Yes,
haven't.
that's right. So we
All right.
just, well, so it's, again, so video, right? To change it for a
Right.
second. You're like,
Are we on
let's start
TikTok?
doing this. Yeah, this on
I-
video. And then you're like, oh, well, we need an intro, right? Like we need like, the little spiel at the
Sure.
beginning. And then you're like, oh, well, then we should really have one at the end. And what about this scenario? And then what photos are we going to use? And then we got to have somebody to build it. And then it's like, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden you're right. It's like this 3-week process.
Sure.
And you're like,
Right.
oh, now I have a 10-second segment that I can put on the beginning of the
Just pay
recording.
Burt Wagner for like 5 hours. I'm sure he can make something great.
So that was probably my problem, right? I didn't use my network there, right? Trying to think
Right.
a little bit outside the box. Oh no, okay.
$25,000 later.
Yeah, that's right.
Carlos is like, do we really need a full shooting crew in my living room? This is such a good team. No,
Well,
we need B-roll.
Well, and the awkward part is that they have to do it through the windows because of COVID. Actually, I have a good story. I have to tell you this story. I know we're at the end of the podcast. I'm telling you anyway.
Here we go.
So my cousin's husband is a young but like really well-respected cinematographer, right? And he usually shoots like commercials and things, and he travels all over the world, or at least he used to.
Sure.
So COVID happened, and he's like, well, how am I going to do my job? He would shoot commercials with his family members, like cousins and relatives, as the actors, because they weren't as worried about the exposure with family because they're
Sure.
hanging out.
Sure.
And so I just love the idea that he like roped in his family so that he can continue producing commercials while everybody else is shut down. It's awesome. So
does he have to do quite a bit in post then? Right? Like we've been talking about video.
I mean, his family's pretty. I don't think so.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say yeah. That's right. Like I realized, man, I need to shave again, and there's that weight loss we've been talking about.
Oh yeah, no, I'm aware of that. Yeah, I got a bunch of COVID pounds, but no, I don't think so. I don't know. I didn't ask.
Sure.
But I thought that
Hey,
was
if they're not speaking roles, that's only $20 a day.
funny.
Yeah.
That's why Kevin always talks, so he has to get paid the extra.
Yeah, Randolph West had some interesting experiences because he's actually been in like
Yeah. I think he's got like an
Corpse,
IMDb page. Yeah.
Yeah.
Randolph does have an IMDb page. There are a couple of entries in there.
Yeah. So, but I think in that, obviously the corpse, he did not have a speaking role, but okay. So I did find it. Compañeros.
Oh, good.
Right. We showing a little love for the podcast, and I'm showing a little love to you. So we've got Josh Darnell, Jason Romans, Greg Moore, and Francisco. Thanks for showing a little love to the podcast. Thanks for listening. Right. So compañeros, wherever you are, right, as you're walking the dog, Dan Watson, so Dan told me that he was listening while walking the dog because all the commutes have gone down. So most of my correspondence is like, hey, I'm catching up on the episodes, right? Because I don't have a commute anymore. So thanks for continuing to hang there with us. As always, we're interested in what you have to say. If there's something, if you want to reach out to us, you can do so. Eugene.
Yeah, you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at SQL Gene. You can find me on Instagram, but I'm not going to tell you where.
Ooh.
Mr. Kevin. Me here. You can find me searching for 5 good men or in a barrel someplace. We're going to keep going with awkward philosophy analogies.
Gotcha.
Okay, so obviously I'm in the dark, philosophy is not my thing, but you can find me at LinkedIn at Carlos L. Chacon. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
Data Partners.